Chair McPherson, we're ready to go.
I would like to call this committee of the whole meeting of November 18th, 2020 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Paul McPherson, Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast on our YouTube channel. I will ask our town clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum. Julie, please go ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Regima.
Here.
Councillor Russell.
Here.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson.
Here.
Councillor Miklick.
Here.
Councillor Timmers.
Here.
Councillor Reimer.
Here.
Mayor Easton is attending a public health meeting at the region and will be arriving late. And Councillor Brunet is marked absent. We have quorum.
Thank you, Julie. In addition, I want to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us tonight electronically. Chief Administrative Officer Mike Kirkopoulos, Associate Director of Planning and Development Matt Bruder, our Director of Community Services Shannon McKay, Fire Chief Greg Hudson, our Economic Development Officer Paul Deaney, Director of Public Works Dave Graham, Cameron Rotz, who is our Economic Development Intern, our Legislative and Committee Coordinator Aaron Plant, and moderating and clerking the meeting tonight, we have our Town Clerk Julie Kirkolos. IT staff are also in attendance. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and/or clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and to regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair will ask, the clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, press the raise hand feature on your video call and the clerk will track our speakers list today and then invite you to speak when I open it for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announcing the mover, the clerk will then call out the vote by reading each council member's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? None. Moving to confirmation of the agenda. Do members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? There are none. Statutory public meetings. We have no statutory public meetings this evening. Although there are no statutory public meetings occurring for this evening's committee of the whole meeting, staff have established procedures for the public to participate at future meetings. Information is available on our town website, and any future notices of public meetings will also provide direction on how the public can participate. Moving to the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We have delegations coming first. There are no delegations this evening. For reports, we will now consider item 6.2, report AD-7-20, Town of Lincoln access to broadband. Do members of council have any questions or comments?
So I believe Chair McPherson, Paul Deaney, our Economic Development Officer, has a few comments to make before we head into the presentation for that report.
That's good. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Madam Clerk and Mr. Chair. I appreciate Council's indulgence for a couple of comments this evening before we do turn it over to Cameron for a brief presentation. As you'll recall, a few months ago, we did talk at one of our committee meetings about access to broadband internet being a key component of our both of our long-term economic development strategy, but obviously our short-term economic recovery as we go through COVID-19 and the effects the pandemic has had on both our business community and, quite frankly, residents alike. Before I do turn it over to Cameron, I just want to introduce him. Cameron has been with us since I think it was late spring. Joins us from the University of Waterloo as he's doing his master's degree in economic development, and just recently submitted his thesis paper to be the last little hurdle before he graduates. And so Cameron is a St. Catharines native. He's been very much an integral component of our business outreach program as we reached our businesses throughout the pandemic. Has really been on the front lines with myself as we really have been reaching out to businesses, talking to them, walking them through economic recovery, and integral in communicating a lot of our recovery programs, both locally, regionally, and provincially as well. So without further ado, I do turn it over to Cameron with a short presentation, and we're happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Chair McPherson. Madam Clerk, if you don't mind opening up the presentation, I can begin.
Thank you. One moment.
So essentially, the presentation is going to give a general sense of the access to broadband report that everyone was provided. As Paul mentioned, with COVID-19, broadband has become a growing concern, not only in Lincoln, but across everywhere. For example, as we're holding this meeting. So, as mentioned, access to high-speed internet has become an integral part of our daily lives, highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the drastic shift to online economic activity. While there's internet access throughout the town, the speeds available are not uniform. In some areas, only meet the CRT minimum standards. And for those who don't know, the CRTC minimum standards are 50 megabits per second download speeds and 10 megabits per second upload speeds. Telecommunication service providers such as Bell and WIC do not have the incentives to invest in lower density populated areas. There's just not the return on investment for these companies to invest in the infrastructure that they need to provide the necessary internet speeds. The provincial and federal government have released multiple strategies and funding programs to connect 98% of Canadians with high-speed internet by 2026. This was actually released early November, and it replaced the old promise of connecting all Canadians with high-speed internet by 2030. The town can play a role in coordinating with public and private stakeholders, community members, and other local area municipalities on fast-tracking efforts to achieve the recommended internet service speeds in Lincoln. So the current broadband accessibility in Lincoln, lots of these points I gathered from a variety of interactive mapping tools, some provided by the provincial government, some provided by the federal government, and even some provided by some of our telecommunication service providers. So what I gathered was that broadband in Lincoln has never been, as mentioned, an overarching concern to our business and residential community until COVID-19. Universal speeds of at least 50-10 megabits per second only exist in the main centers of Beamsville and Vineland. Aside from a few outliers in Jordan Station, and along King Street, the remaining areas cover speeds of at least 25 to 10 megabits per second, half of the CRTC minimum standard. And as technology continues to grow and we are increasing our internet traffic, even speeds of 50 to 10 megabits per second aren't necessarily adequate for streaming, video conferencing all at once, doing it using multiple devices all at once. So even those speeds, although they are the CRTC minimum standard, still aren't as adequate for our business community and our residential community as it should be. And most importantly, rural areas in Lincoln are the most underserviced areas in the town, especially important for agriculture and agritourism businesses, such as the wineries, our tender fruit growers, and our greenhouses. So the first map that you see here, it shows that connection speeds are not evenly distributed. This map was gathered from the federal government's website. So as you can see by the legend, green represents areas that have speeds of at least 50-10 megabits per second, whereas you go down, the lighter blue is 25 to 5, and as you get darker, 5 to 1, and then purple less than 5 to 1. As you can see, as I mentioned, 50-10 only really exists in the areas of Beamsville, Vineland, and Jordan, and also along our main streets, where the rest of Lincoln, they really don't have these CRTC minimum standards. I also want to make a note that these maps that are provided, they aren't 100% accurate. and I'll go into that more when you take a look at the next map. But as you can see, these are actually real-time tests further showcased. This was a program done by NWIC where they actually took real-time speed tests from homes across the Niagara region, but this is just zoomed in Lincoln. And as you can see, it does follow a similar role to the previous map, but there is some outliers such as north of the QEW there. The other map showed that this was not 5010, but when someone actually did their internet speed, it showed as 5010. So there is a bunch of variables that are dependent based on how much you pay, et cetera, as I'm sure most of you are aware of. So some of the current actions from the economic development staff. Since I started, broadband has been a huge role of what I've taken on. There's many programs and grants that we have actually already applied for, some successful, some not successful. But to sum it up, we've done a detailed report, as you know, for council on the importance of broadband and the available opportunities for the town. We have partnered with NWIC on improving connectivity on the Improving Connectivity Ontario program, also known as ICON. We are now in phase 2 of that application process. We were approved, so we're hoping once we get through phase 2, we can start implementing some of these technologies. We are actually currently in conversation with the Niagara Regional Broadband Network, also known as NRBN, on developing detailed mapping and community engagement opportunities. Because as I mentioned, there is the maps that were provided, they aren't 100% accurate, and we want to make sure that we can narrow down which areas really are truly in need and help the community as much as we can. And we are also investigating the recently released Universal Broadband Fund by reviewing the application process and speaking with local partners about a joint application, as the private sector will be a key component on delivering these infrastructure projects. This fund was actually released the day before the report was handed in, so it's fresh, and we're super excited to continue looking into that. And finally, how can the town help? Through coordination with public and private stakeholders, the town can fast track efforts to achieve the recommended internet service speeds by identifying funding and program opportunities for the town to partner with local telecommunication providers, such as the ICON grant and the Universal Broadband Fund. We can provide expedited permitting applications to those providers wishing to undertake infrastructure projects to increase broadband availability. We can investigate the opportunities for incentives to reduce overall costs associated with large infrastructure projects. And we include the laying of wires and fiber optics as standard practice when conducting road work in the right of way. We actually discovered this with one of our talks with NRBN that as we do more infrastructure projects, especially with conducting road work and laying down pavement, it is actually more beneficial to get these fiber optics into the ground right away, as opposed to obviously tearing up the ground and getting them under at another time. So is there any questions, comments, or clarity? Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Cameron, and appreciate council's indulgence on that with the presentation. And just before we do move into questions, I just wanted to clarify one thing in terms of the ICON application that we partnered with NWIC on. We were approved to move to phase 2, which is just phase 2 of the actual application process. So we haven't been select to actually move forward with the actual infrastructure project itself, but optimistic that we have been chosen to move to phase 2. So thank you, Madam Clerk, over to you.
Thank you to you, Cameron, and to Paul for that presentation. Who did we have first there, Julie?
We have Councillor Timmers.
Go ahead, Councillor.
I'm not sure if my headset's working, so I'm going to take it off. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Through to Cameron. Cameron, great report. Very happy to see this come tonight. I was going to ask about the NWIC Phase 2 funding, but I think Paul, you just answered that for me. I think this is great to see the maps, to see the mapping, and to see where we definitely are lacking service. You know, I'm in one of the areas that I just went from five down, 1 up, and I just graduated to 15 down and 5 up. So I'm pretty excited about that right now. But it's been a struggle up here forever, right? So if we can partner, you know, with NWIC or any provider in any way that the town can assist, that would be fantastic, because now that COVID has hit, this has really made, it's very apparent, like how people are struggling with connectivity issues. And prior to COVID, there were pockets of people, it just was kind of invisible. So it's really brought it to the forefront. So I'm really hopeful that we can make some improvements and get some higher speeds in our areas that are lacking. So very happy to see this tonight, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor. And I think we had one drop off. We have Counselor Mikulik. Go ahead, Counselor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Through you to both Cameron and Mr. Deanne, Mr. Ronson, Mr. Deanne. I read the report. It's pretty accurate. I've been challenged with internet, as many would know, and I brought this issue up, and I was personally excited about this report as well. And it's funny, like I don't know if we can stress the importance of it from both an economic development point of view as well as a work point of view, but also as a safety point of view. Like I was speaking to a doctor today. He has lived in Jordan, south of the QEW since '94, and said he had poor internet, but loves where he lives. He loves this town. And so much so that he decided to build a new house about 2 minutes from Beamsville, still within Lincoln. And he still is challenged with internet. And he's frustrated because he's trying to, he's part of a telemedicine system, and he's struggling with the poor internet, and especially during this pandemic. And he said, like, could you imagine if he was able to not have to drive to his office in Niagara Falls and save himself 45 minutes each way if he could take another call or two at home instead? So he's trying to connect with, through addictions. He specializes with addictions and with consulting and counseling, but he can't do it from home. And that's why I think there is an importance, if we want to retain professionals within our town to both live and work. This sort of report is extremely important. And for us to know what to ask for or what to want, we have to take a look and see what we have currently and how best to move forward to try to make it better, to retain this sort of talent. So that's the comment I had, and that's the comments that I mentioned to this person I was talking to today that I would bring forward. So thank you very much, and keep on this, both Mr. Rotz and Mr. Deanne. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me that time.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Regima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. Fascinating report, really interesting. And yeah, it was Councillor Mikulik that first brought this up, and Councillor Timmers has been talking about this for a long time, the struggles for connectivity. But certainly since COVID, we know it's not a luxury anymore, it's a need. And Councillor Mikulik was talking about the conversations he had with his doctor. And I was thinking of conversations that Councillor Timmers, Shannon McKay, and Sarah Ann had with a number of vulnerable populations over a period of about 9 weeks when we met weekly with people. And we heard repeatedly that there are many examples of people in tough social situations, for example, family violence, that pre-COVID would be able to access counseling services and assistance by stepping out and going in to see someone. But now they're not able to do so in person, and in some cases aren't able to connect digitally to access assistance either. And West Lincoln was the example that one particular person mentioned as not having the connectivity, and we're seeing tonight that we don't either in many situations. So for a lot of people, it's a big problem for that reason. And I wanted to ask a question. I guess, at what point do we learn what the dollar value is for the infrastructure that's required to be in place? Do we know any of that? Do we know about certain areas? or is that next steps?
If I may, Cameron, through you, Council or Chairman, to the councillor. So part of next steps, as Cameron had sort of highlighted in both the report and the presentation, we need to get some better detailed mapping. The mapping that was provided gives us a good overview and a good snapshot of what we have, but even the mapping itself is lacking. Just to give an example, it actually shows our industrial park in Beamsville as being under-serviced, whereas in conversations with NRBN, they actually said, no, we've got fiber optics there. So just one example of where the mapping is not 100% accurate. I mean, this is really there's a short-term gain that we can make in terms of some applying to these programs. There's a longer-term play as well. We definitely need to partner with the private sector to make this happen. But some of those next steps and those additional conversations would hopefully help us to narrow down in terms of what specifically would be required and maybe ballpark in terms of some financial costs as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I wasn't sure if some dollar values had come up during that application process for funding, but yeah, I can see that there's a lot of exploratory work still to do, and this is a really great start. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other counselors with their hands up. So a couple of things from me. First of all, absolutely outstanding report. I mean, there's so much detail in that report. It really makes it challenging for any of us to find questions to ask. And, the presentation, Cameron, very well done. The only thing that I got thinking about when reading all through this is there's a heavy reliance on government funding. Is there a private sector play here? Not NWIC and those folks, but the greenhouse operations and the egg operation. And for those, in knocking on doors in 2014, again in 2018, out here in the East End, several operations, people that have, a guy right up the street from me runs a egg production facility. Both times I knocked on his door, it was about broadband. So this is not a new item. Yes, it's been exposed during the pandemic, but it's not new. And especially in, the agricultural area, the agricultural industry. So I wonder if there's not an interested private sector that would feel willing to partner, and willing to ante up to some extent to assist with NWIC or whatever company it is to get set up, because it's in their best interest. So I just probably, it's too early to maybe get an answer to that, but maybe something to think about and reach out to those industries that we know very well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for the question, and completely agree with you. I mean, there's a two-pronged approach that we want to take to this. One, obviously, we need the private sector when it comes to the infrastructure, that would require to be put into the ground. It's not something that the municipality would be taking care of. It's really those internet service providers that would be looking after that, but there's definitely ways we can partner with them. The second thing, and Cameron sort of mentioned it briefly in terms of next step, is really doing some engagement with the community, both residents and businesses. One thing we want to do is you're right, maybe a certain resident in the community or a certain business is fine with the 25 download speeds and 5 upload or 10 upload. But what we want to do is do some engagement, say, okay, greenhouse operator or winery or resident on 9th Street in Jordan, if you're interested in more internet speeds, let us know, because then we can compile that data and then we make the business case of the ISP that says, listen, you have a pocket of density in this area that wants faster speeds. Start to do that analysis and to identify how much it would cost to bring the infrastructure over there. And then let's partner on some of these applications that are coming down the pipeline. As much as we'd like to do the whole community in one fell swoop, it really is going to be a little bit of a longer term game plan. So outreach to our residents and our businesses is definitely top of mind.
Okay. Very good. So we are going to need a mover, as our mover was Mayor Easton, who is still at the region. So Julie, can we get a mover for this motion?
Thank you. I did see Councillor Timmer's hand up first, so we will, it'll be moved by Councillor Timmers.
Okay, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers that report AD 7-20 regarding the town of Lincoln access to broadband be received for information. I will now ask our clerk to call out the vote. Julie, please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair McPherson. Councillor Miklick,
Not usually first, but yes.
thank you. Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Chair McPherson.
Yes.
And that carries.
We now consider item 6.3, report AD-8-20, Bill 213, Better for People, Smarter for Business Act 2020. Do members of council have any questions or comments? Councillor Rajima.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I have a couple of questions. Just going to find, the first one is on page 4 under, no, sorry, it's at the very end, actually. Ministry of Transportation, and that's on page 7 of this report. Streamlining municipal traffic studies, proposing that municipalities will have the ability to complete a single traffic study for a proposed development area or business park along a highway where appropriate, instead of individual studies for each new development project. I'm wondering if the director of planning or somebody could just, if you know how this would work out, because I know that when a development application comes forward, just things as simple as where the proposed access would be could change over the life of the approval process, and that would affect traffic flow. So how would that work? How would that work in terms of having one traffic study that the municipality has conducted and put on file ahead of time? Do we know?
Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think Paul might have something to add as well, but I think it's also, it pertains to an overall area where, we're planning for a significant amount of development. Instead of having piecemeal traffic studies, maybe for each piece of that development, you have one overarching traffic study to kind of, I think, develop and understand some of the overall volumes associated with that area. But in terms of actual specific accesses and things like that, I think, you would probably still look to, although they would be developed to a preliminary level as each phase kind of gets built up, I think there might be some minor amendments and things, but it's overall just to streamline it instead of developing, the traffic assessment in a piecemeal approach.
So much like a secondary plan for an area for development, and then it's just sort of an overall look, and then that would be a basis plan for individual traffic studies for each development.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, yeah, that's definitely a way that it could go, but I'll also defer to my colleague, Mr. Deaney, seems to have a comment to make as well.
I do.
Mr.
Thank
Dan.
you, Mr. Bruder, and Chair, through you to the councillor. So the overarching intent or purpose of this bill, rather, it is an omnibus bill, as you can see from the report. It affects, at a glance, probably over 20, maybe even more acts that the provincial government has. And it's really about, expediting development, expediting processes, reducing red tape, and we're still doing some deeper analysis into this. I mean, keep in mind, it is just went through first reading. It's still in second reading at Queen's Park, and bills generally, as they become law, change throughout the process when it goes in committee and such. But overarching, and there's a lot of elements in here. Overarching is about reducing red tape, streamlining processes, and making sure departments at the Ontario government are sort of lockstep when it comes to some development and expediting businesses.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that this is early in the process, and we're going to hear more about it and more clarified, more detail. because I also have a question about on page 5, clarify rules to redevelop and revitalize vacant lands faster. It says, as committed to in the Made in Ontario Environment Plan, the Ontario government has taken steps to remove unnecessary barriers to put vacant lands back to good use. To support this work, Ontario is reviewing processes and providing new and updated guidance to help or to better clarify rules for property owners and municipalities that want to redevelop and revitalize historically contaminated lands. So that's so I guess my question is, is this bill proposed to put those processes in place, or is this bill proposed to put systems in place so that these rules can be clarified? So I'm wondering if we know, was there enough detail in the documents that we reviewed that we have some idea of what these, how these rules are proposed to be clarified?
So through you, Chair, to the councillor. So we, I mean, you're correct in the sense that, you know, we do need to do a deeper dive, partially, you know, because once the bill becomes law, then they'll sort of streamline exactly what the bill is supposed to do. But you are correct. It's to streamline some of those controls. And at the end of the day, we'll be looking back in terms of what the actual bill is, but really it's around sort of streamlining some of the processes that the Ontario government has and removing some of that duplication or red tape. So looking forward to coming back once it's actually a law.
Yeah, so we don't know a lot of the detail yet, basically. Okay, well, I appreciate the overview of this. It is an omnibus bill. Thank you.
Councillor Mikulik, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to, I'm thinking Mr. Bruder. On that same page 5, address low-risk nuisance incidents. I mentioned in the past with regards, does this bill address at all environmental concerns when redeveloping or remediating properties? The reason why I ask this is because, like, I believe currently when remediating properties, there's just one set of standards. And sometimes I ask myself or say to myself, why do we need to remediate a property to a level that has to be residential? Let's take, for example, if it's an industrial part of town, why should that piece of property be remediated to a level that would be suitable to grow tomatoes if you never have the plan to grow tomatoes? Why can't, is it possible to look into this further as far as different levels of remediation required for a property within certain zones or sensitive or less sensitive areas?
Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Well, certainly. I think already sometimes it's very site specific in terms of, you know, what the level of contamination that requires remediation is present on the site as it is, and combined with the type of land use that's proposed there. Sometimes with an industrial area, you know, if you're proposing a like use, that same level of remediation that you would need to implement a residential land use you wouldn't necessarily need that even now. But I do think it is something that can be delved into a little bit further. Like Mr. Deaney said earlier, I think this is just the very earlier stages. So I think some of those details will still come out in some of this as we move forward.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for. That just rather than painting a swath across, you know, painting a brush across a whole swath of land, you know, that it's looked at more specifically and more in detail rather than just, you know, current standards I think we have right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And as mentioned, I mean, there is a lot in this omnibus bill, and you know, it certainly looks like the Ford government is moving on, you know, trying to cut red tape, and it is sort of a lot to digest. My question would be, who would take the lead on this for us? Is that you, Mr. Deaney, or how do we, you know, kind of work through this major change to a long list of current, policies.
Thank you for the question, Chair. I mean, once we see the final bill, I think both Mr. Bruder and I, who started sort of looking at it, can make the determination in terms of which other departments here at Town Hall we need to bring in to really do a little bit of a deeper dive on some of this legislation. But for the most part, since Mr. Bruder and I have started, I'm sure we can tackle it once it's become law.
Very good, very good. And then, once we do digest it and get it down to how it can apply in Lincoln, then I would think it's a communication out to those that will be most affected and hopefully most favorably affected. So very good. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Regima that report AD-820 regarding the Ontario government's Bill 213, Better for People, Smarter for Business Act 2020 be received for information. I will now ask Julie to call out the vote.
Thanks, Chair McPherson. And I'll begin with Councillor Miklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Regima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Chair McPherson,
Yes.
and Councillor Brunet and Mayor Easton are marked absent. Thank you.
We have now concluded the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Councillor and Chair Mike Mikulik and Deputy Mayor to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee. Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair McPherson. We're going to welcome to the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. Item 7.1, delegations. We have no delegations this evening for the General Business and Finance Committee. Item 7.2, report. We will now consider item 7.2, report FN-09-20 Aggregate Resources Act License Fee Disbursement. I'm sure members of council have read this. It's quite a bit to read. Does anybody have any questions regarding this report?
Chair Miklick, we have Councillor McPherson up first.
Councillor McPherson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Understand that the report is an information piece and that we are basically being told what amount of money we are receiving. We also learned, how the money is arrived at and then how the money is divvied up. And also we've seen that over the last, 10 or 12 years, the amount has been changed. The amount per ton has been changed pretty significantly. I think it went from about 6 or 7 cents a ton to double in 17 to 12 cents. And now in 19 and 20, it's gone to 20 and almost 21 cents. I guess my question would be, and this kind of ties back to some of our challenges that we have here in town about trucks rolling through our town. And, obviously we have a quarry in our town boundary. And, I think the question would be, do those numbers add up? And do we, in fact, receive the monies that we need in order to make the repairs that need to be made? So probably through to, since we don't have the financial folks here tonight, probably through to Mr. Graham to respond. Mr. Chair.
Yeah, either Mr. Graham or Mr. Kirkopoulos, but we'll give Mr. Graham the first chance. Is he with us?
Yep. Yes. Yes, I am.
Oh,
Mr.
there you
Chair.
are. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor McPherson's question. Great question. I mean, I think what I'd like to point out for sure it's definitely going in the right direction. If you look at the graph in the report, we are receiving over the last couple of years a lot more money. So that trend up is definitely where we want to see this continuing to move. This money, we do reinvest it into an aggregate resource reserve fund. And that fund does go to help fund our annual roads capital program. So that money is being spent on capital road works in our community. We also, in this past budget in 2020, we've also invested some of that funding into the Beansville truck bypass implementation study that we are initiating, because that is directly related to truck movements, trucks in the community. A lot of that truck traffic does originate or come from the quarry. So that's another investment we're making with some of this funding that we do receive.
So thank you for that, Mr. Graham. And it'd be interesting. I think it'd be interesting, and I'm not looking to make work here, but it'd be interesting to take a look at what, and I think we track these numbers, what is the cost of a kilometer of road to us? What was that cost back in 2006-07? And what has happened to that cost to 2020? And they obviously made a huge jump in 2019 and 2020. So somebody's in their ear about costs going up. So it'd be just interesting to see, how do those two graphs look side by side? The cost of repair and maintenance of a stretch of road, whether it be a kilometer, whatever it is, and then how does this compensation measure up against that? So just because we may want to push back. I think it's
Tapmo.
Tapmo. We may want to send something to Tapmo to say it ain't enough. We need more. That type of approach. And if we've got some documentation to prove it, I think our position is much stronger. So, just some thoughts, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. I'll comment to that shortly. I see Mr. Kirkopoulos' hand is up. Mr. Kirkopoulos?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. So I think that's a great idea. I mean, our year-end balance in that aggregate resource reserve fund is healthy. It sits at about 482,000 and a little bit. It is something that I think we can continue to advocate for. Absolutely. And I think something that we can bring both to TAPMO as well as the various other bodies, because I think if Director Graham was to do that calculation, and I know he can, at the end of the day, I don't think it's ever enough, Councillor. And so I think continued advocacy, and I see Dave nodding, and we talked about this before, the more we can lobby, the more we can, have that number increase, the better.
Thank you very much, Mr. CAO. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I just have some comments, and Councillor McPherson was he was saying what I was thinking already. But the thing that I did, what I looked into, was this Aggregate Resources Act is, I believe it's since 1994, and when it was negotiated, it was basically negotiated a set rate with the increases based on inflation. And since then, I think inflation is not good enough. There's been provincial downloading. There's been plenty of development. I think there's been changes in the way finance on our end has taken place. There's not too many budgets, at a municipal level that operate on a 2% increase. So the increases over the last number of years and the damage that's occurred on the roads, the various complaints that we've received, I have to agree, I'm not sure if they're in keeping in line with the funding that we're receiving. through either the provincial government or through the Aggregate Resources Act. So I would encourage a discussion on possibly seeking more funds in that regard. And you receive a check, and it's easy to receive a check. It's, you know, but is it enough? That's the concern that I would have. So those are my comments. So no other questions on that. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell to receive and file the Aggregate Resource Act License Fee Disbursement Report FN-09-20. I will now ask the clerk to call the vote.
Thanks, Chair McClick. Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Chair McClick,
Yes.
and Councillor Brunet, and Mayor Easton is marked absent. That carries.
Okay, 7.3 report. We will now consider item 7.3, report AD-06-20, Universal Basic Income. Do members of council have any questions or comments? I see.
We have Councillor Pachariva up first, Chair McClick.
Okay, Councillor Pachariva.
Yeah, thanks through you, Chairman. I'm very happy to see this come back. It was I originally brought this motion forward as part of an article of correspondence from the Health Department of Muskoka and also the City of Kitchener. So, you know, if you're looking at the social determinants of health, this is you know, about helping people that right now are marginalized. So their incidence of going to the hospital go down. People that are in this area tend to be diabetic and not eating properly, and that goes down. And the fallacy that everyone's going to sit around and live the life of Riley isn't true. For those that are working, continue to work. They find better jobs. They find better housing. They their mental health gets better. And for those that maybe not work, the youth stay in school. They don't quit school to get a low-paying job, or women tend to are off on mat leave, or they go back to school to better themselves. So I'm really excited to see this. You know, the region endorsed it, a pilot project, and if we're going to be serious, you know, about changing thought patterns and you know, looking at the way that the government funds things, and CERB was a tremendous success, and we've also got to look at modernization and how that's affecting people. So not only is COVID causing them to lose their job, but so is modernization and you know, robotics and things like that. So, you know, you only have to look at the auto industry where there was once 20,000 people and it's being done by a few hundred. So happy to see this come forward, and happy to support it, and ask the government to do some due diligence and have a look at it, because any of the tests that they've done in Dauphin, Manitoba, or Hamilton have all turned out on the positive. So it's just a matter of how to fund it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pachariva. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, again, don't mean to counterpoint my my vice chair of budget, but I shall if I have to. So the one question, or I have a few questions. The first one I have, is in regards to the actual first point of the regional's recommendation. So if everybody wants to just flip over to what the reco, it's right in, I believe, page 2. I'm frozen right now on my screen. So the first one says the region acknowledges the inequitable impacts of COVID-19 impact on Niagara residents, including disproportionate burden of both illness and economic harm borne by those of lower income or in poverty. In the report the region provided, and any of the links that they provided as addendum, and also in the report that Mr. Akropoulos provided as well, none of them actually have any regional stats on COVID. So I'm just wondering how we can draw that conclusion based on nothing more than generalizations. To Mr. Kirkopoulos, I think.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, at the end of the day, I think, you know, a little bit of what this report is also calling for is data. And I think, you know, Councillor Russell makes a good point around, you know, what is the data that Niagara region is using to make these comments. I'd suggest that I think, and you're right, it's anecdotal at this point. I think that data is being pulled together. I think, you know, we can all agree that the pandemic has had an effect on our community. What that effect is and the severity of that effect, I think, you know, we need to put numbers to. But I think that's why this report, if I could, and maybe expand a little bit on the question, isn't calling for us to support an actual UBI at this particular point in time, but rather investigate and provide data on the efficacy of such a program. So we need data. That's what we're calling for. And, you know, what was attached and what we received from the region doesn't necessarily address the specific data question that you have, Councillor, or the data that I think is required to make a decision like this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kirkopoulos. And 2 more questions. One is probably a really quick hitter. The report that we're receiving, it is tied to a previous motion, but we're not actually voting or on the motion itself. Or I know that was deferred back, I believe, in July. So this is just for receiving the report, and that motion will probably be brought back forth at a later time, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. This is really to receive this report. And I think what we're not saying in this report, we believe we need a UBI, a universal basic income. Again, we're calling for some more data and the support of the region who is asking for more data.
Okay. One follow-up through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Kirkopoulos. One of the things that this report lacks, I find, is the causality of if a UBI does come into effect. So I think there's one reference into what the Parliamentary Budgetary Office had estimated back in April, I believe, of about 80 or $78 billion for this to come forward. Since then, as of beginning of November, it's been updated. So the range that they're anticipating now is between 84 and $197 billion by 2024. So when you factor in those numbers, I would like to see whatever information does come forward, an actual true linkage of, okay, so this is what the cost is going to be, and this is how those costs are going to be offset. Again, oftentimes when we see these, and even with the CERB, and Councillor Pachariva did make a good point that for the pandemic conditions, it definitely was very successful. However, with that being said, right now, the government has not said how they're going to pay back that money. We have no ability to raise revenue to offset that. I believe we're sitting around $84 billion for it. But again, at the current time, that's definitely what the right decision was. But we will find out shortly in the coming years of how that money is going to get paid back through likely increased taxation and other, again, various models. Again, they're looking at different things that they can bring forward. But bringing this forward, again, I would like to see if they are going to show the benefits of what this is, they should also show what that direct cause will be to the taxpayer. So hopefully that's somewhere going to be outlined and requested.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just a brief response to Councillor Russell. I mean, I think that exactly, Councillor, is part of the investigation. You know, I think that the goal will be determining what are the costs, who needs it, and then what are the effects and potential other issues that go along with it. So if we're providing supports in one area, are we seeing decreases in other areas? And I think, to use your word, what is that that causality that goes between the two?
think you're frozen, Councillor Russell.
Oh, can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll come back in.
Okay.
Chair
Madam Clerk,
Micklef,
who do we have next?
thank you. We have Councillor McPherson up next.
All right. Councillor McPherson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Just a couple of quick comments. Thank you for the report. I certainly learned more about the universal basic income just in this report, and I think it was very interesting to see a little bit about how it did work when it was brought forward in 2016, and they ran it for, I guess, close to 2 years before the election shut it down. So, I think that the basics are there that we didn't have in the previous discussion, where we were kind of all grappling for what this mean, what do they still get all these other benefits, and yet they get this guaranteed universal basic, and what's that going to cost, and all those other things. So, I really appreciate, seeing how it works, and also hearing about the benefits, as Councillor Pachariva mentioned, just the social benefits that have been expressed by those that were on it here in Ontario for the short period of time, and also around the world, and the impact that it's made in other countries that have also either done pilot projects or have put in a universal basic income. So, I think it's the start of the discussion. I think that it makes sense to continue to pursue the discussion, and I think that's what we're being asked to do tonight is show our support that this is something that our provincial and federal governments look at and consider quite seriously, because and the pandemic is maybe a big motivator to it, but I think pandemic aside, I think that it makes sense in a country such as ours that our all of us have the opportunity to a basic standard of living, and I see it really no different than our medical system in that we provide a medical system that nobody is left on the street, and I think that this type of program, and I'm sure they would work through the details so they're not handing out cash to both of a person's hands. They're just handing one hand some cash. But I think it makes sense that at this point there's enough information in this report that we should look at supporting this. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just make a couple comments. First and foremost, I also want to thank Cameron, who was responsible for doing a lot of the research here. But Councillor McPherson, I think in a lot of ways, you're correct. There's a lot of countries I think we look at when we think of those progressive countries in Europe, at least, that are trying pilot projects. So I think data is important. I'll go back to the kind of data. Of course, there's pros and cons when we look at any sort of massive policy change, especially one of this scope and of this magnitude. Especially when we look at areas around unpaid care workers and so forth. And I think we're seeing some of that exacerbated more right now as we fight through this global pandemic. But again, I'll go back to the report does call for data, does call for us to support the region's call for more data. So, thanks for your comments.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, who do we have next?
Councillor Timmers is up next.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair. I don't really have any questions, just some comments. I agree with Councillor McPherson's comments. This is extremely complex, and finally, to see the recommendations from the region, it's great, because that's what we need to do. We need to study, we need to get the data, and we need to work on this long term. It's going to take a long time to roll something like this out. And there's so many different branches, and the way that it will work, I can't even put my head around it right now because there's just so many pieces to it. But we know that the cost of poverty is huge. It's not working. You know, having people living in poverty is not working. Helping them to reach out, to step out of that lifestyle, there's got to be benefits. And we just have to see the data, and we have to see the studies and the pilots roll out, and see what comes of it. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of positives. There's going to be a lot of work trying to figure this all out, because there's so many programs right now and so many supplemental incomes that are connected. So when we remove all of those, you know, where do we end up? We've got like childcare subsidies and mental health support and housing and employment and Ontario Works and ODSP. Like, there's all of these different programs. So all of that has to be figured out. So I'm very happy to support these recommendations, and very hopeful that, you know, our voices will be heard, and that the powers that be will consider this seriously and really get to work and figure this out.
Cappuccino for it.
My comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Timmers. Just if I may, before we go to the next councillor, if I may ask the CAO, this report, it's a pretty strong, you know, there's acknowledgements, there's calling upon, there's recommending and directing. So I just want to make sure, like, we're not in any way supportive or saying yes to UBI. We are more or less just recommending, or we're looking at supporting the investigation of the feasibility or the possibility of it. We're not here to say that we are for or against. We are here to say that we are supportive of the investigation of it. Am I correct in that?
To you, Mr. Chair, you are correct, Councillor. We've actually pulled those recommendations. They're verbatim from Niagara Region's recommendations, and all we are doing as the town of Lincoln is receiving for information and supporting Niagara Region's request of the provincial and federal governments to study universal basic income and the benefits and the pros and cons, really, of that universal basic income, and to report on the data.
Okay.
You're correct.
Okay, thank you for that. Next, Ms. Kirkland.
We have Councillor Pachariva.
Councillor Pachariva. Wait.
We have Councillor Rajima, who hasn't spoken yet, though.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. Councillor Pachariva, can you hold that?
Yeah, I'm good with that, DM, because I was going to say Councillor Rajima should go first.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Councillor Rajima.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. When Councillor Pachariva first brought this forward, I was happy, and I thought it was pretty brave of him to bring it forward, because it's not something that we at this level would typically discuss, but and it's controversial. It's really quite controversial, but it's not a new concept. It's something that we've heard about sort of on a higher level for a number of years. We know there's been lots of advocacy for it at the federal level. I've read bits and pieces of it. I read a little bit before seconding the motion that Councillor Pachariva shared with me. So somebody the other day, I heard them talking on the radio, and they called this the COVID era. And I didn't like to hear that, but that's really kind of what's going to be happening. We're going to be dealing with COVID itself and the repercussions of the COVID and COVID-related restrictions on the economy, and its related repercussions on us socially for a long time. And I don't think we've even begun to understand the impact. And so I'm glad we're discussing it. We're tonight expressing support for work and investigation that others are going to be doing. I 100% support it, and I'm looking forward to looking at the data, because of course we have to see the data. But I know that those that strongly advocate for this advocate for it on at least on the partially the basis that the costs, while upfront, are going to be significant, probably. In the long term, there's a lot of savings in terms of the kinds of impacts that we know happen as a result of, as Councillor Timmers was saying, people living in poverty. It's not good. So I'm looking forward for that. I wanted to comment, I was reading through the motion itself, and bullet number 3, I was trying to understand what it meant, then I realized I think there's just a typo. It says that regional council recommend that the federal and provincial governments engaged in pilot projects to study policy innovations that can address poverty and income inequality. I think that's just supposed to be engage.
That's correct, Council.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pleasure. Next, Councillor Pachariva.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor Mikulik, and again, thanks for indulging me. And maybe it's my time on Community Care of West Niagara's board, or my work with the Wise Guys Charity Fund is helping a lot of these marginalized groups. We gave out checks this year in the midst of a pandemic to 13 agencies in Niagara, Open Arms Mission, Start Me Up Niagara, groups like this that are helping those marginalized people. So I'm very passionate about it. I've done, and I would suggest there's lots of articles out there. The Senator Ewan from British Columbia, was on CBC News World, and the Senate has started working on this, and of course it got derailed by COVID. And according to the Office of the Budget Officer, a national UBI, if it was constructed based on Ontario's 2018 pilot, would cost anywhere between $45.8 billion and $96.4 billion, depending on how it's rolled out. In contrast, the federal government spent $177.3 billion on social protection programs. So that's what the Senate was looking at, taking, like Councillor Timmers had mentioned, taking UBI, taking ODSB, taking Ontario Public Works, taking a bunch of tax credits that are currently out there and rolling them all into this program. And one of the other avenues is the refundable tax credits that are benefiting the high income earning Canadians. So getting those high income earners to help fund the social divide and the social inequity. And that's one of the other things that we've seen during COVID, is that those that are really, really rich are getting even richer, and those that aren't are suffering and are kind of hiding there in the shadows. And I just want to close this with, helping one person might not change the world, but it can change the world for that one person. So I look forward to the data coming back and then having those other levels of governments take a hard look at it, and we'll be the benefactor of it. So thank you.
You're welcome. I see Councillor Ringiema's hand up again. Is that correct, Deputy Clerk? Or Madam Clerk?
Yes.
All right, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Chair. I just wanted to comment, one more comment on what Councillor Pachariva said. And speaking of all the programs that are proposed to be potentially rolled into one, I'm just imagining the administrative costs, the costs of administering all those different programs. They must be huge. So they're in there alone would be a big savings, I'm assuming. I'm hoping to hear that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Is there any, Councillor Russell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just again, a response. Again, if that's the case where all those programs are going to be rolled into one, again, I think you've got some basis for funding. Unfortunate thing is, again, based on what, again, I'm sure it's out there probably 50-50, but this is usually, or again, what I have read is on top of a lot of those programs, and they're not saying to roll those programs up. So this would be a net new increase of $86 billion. And again, if it's not, again, it does change the picture, because then really all you're doing is you're just changing current funding or multiple current funding models into a singular funding model. So that in itself, I see likely as a bit of a savings. It's just that if this is on top of, again, it's again, it could be catastrophic as far as the taxation goes.
Yeah, you could be correct. We'll never know. That's not our job to figure out. There's other levels of government to figure that out. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, I think this is probably one of the toughest things that I've had to chair this discussion. But interesting thing, I wanted to clarify that we're not supporting. We're just supporting the idea of looking into it, or having the upper levels of government look into it. We're not pro, we're not against. We're just wanting to see the data and see its feasibility. This isn't a new discussion. I read an article today from a fellow named Brock Dickinson, and there's a man named Thomas Moore. He wrote about basic income since 1516. So this isn't a new subject, and just because we are saying to ourselves that we want to support the idea of investigating it, there's no guarantee that anything will actually come of it. So if they can make it work, that's fine. If they can't, well, then we visit it again next year. Who knows? But these particular times with CERB, it certainly has opened up the discussion and put it back on the table. And definitely the CERB was important when the pandemic first hit. I've yet to really see, siding with Councillor Russell a little bit, I've yet to see from the federal government just how they're going to come up with a financial plan to pay for any of this. We still don't have a 2020 budget from the federal government. So that concerns me a little. And yeah, it's a complex topic. So that being said, there being no further comments or questions, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva that report AD 0620-20 regarding the Regional Municipality of Niagara's basic income for income security PH 6-2020 report be received for information, and that council support the recommendations approved by Niagara Regional Council as follows. 1, the regional council acknowledge the inequitable impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on Niagara residents, including the disproportionate burden of both illness and economic harm borne by those of lower income or in poverty. 2, that regional council call upon the federal and provincial government to prioritize measures to reduce poverty and income inequality in our society as one of the changes that should be initiated by this pandemic. 3, that regional council recommend that the federal and provincial governments engaged in pilot projects to study policy innovations that can address poverty and income inequality, including study of basic income guarantee projects. 4, that regional council particularly recommend that the federal government carefully study the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, for its impact on health and poverty of recipients as lessons that could be applied to a basic income guarantee pilot, or as a platform for instituting a basic income guarantee. And 5, that regional council direct the regional chair to communicate these calls and recommendations to the federal and provincial governments. I will now ask our clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima. Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
thank you. Councillor Russell,
No.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Chair Miklick,
Yes.
and Councillor Brunet and Mayor Easton are marked absent. That carries.
I see a hand up. Councillor Pachariva.
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor Mikulik, to the clerk, Ms. Kirklos. I thought in the region's motion 2 that they said if there was going to be a pilot program conducted, that Niagara would like to be considered. Was that just an aside, or was that actually in their motion? Because there was a lot of chatter around that after this did come forward. I don't know if either you or Mr. Kirkopoulos knows, but I don't see it in this tonight, so.
Okay, thank you. The
Okay.
motion that you have before you, Councillor Pachariva, is what was provided by Paul Deaney, and that was in the regionals motion that they put forward. So Paul, do you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and Deputy Mayor, through you to the councillor. So you're correct in that the motion, or the recommendations in the regional reports are verbatim in our report. Councillor, I think what you're talking about is some of the side conversations that happen around this.
Okay.
But I don't think that made it into the final recommendations of the
Okay.
Okay. Okay, we have now concluded the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Councillor and Chair Diane Rengema to assume the chair at this time for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Mikulik. We have no delegations this evening for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee. And under the consent agenda, we're now considering consent agenda item number 8.2, and that's the Age-Friendly Citizen Advisory Committee minutes of October 1st, 2020. Would any member like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? I don't see any hands up. So I have a motion moved by Councillor McPherson that Council receive for information item 8.2, Age-Friendly Citizen Advisory Committee minutes of October 1st, 2020. And I will now ask our clerk, Julie, to call the vote.
Thanks, Chair Rajima. I'll begin with Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Chair Rajima.
Yes.
Thank you. And Councillor Brunet and Mayor Easton is marked absent, and that carries.
Thank you. And now on to item 8.3, which is report CS 0920, project update regarding the permanent off-leash dog park. Do any members of council have any questions or comments to this report? I know that this matter was brought before us and then tabled for a little while so that more public consultation could be done. I see Councillor Timmers' hand up, and then Councillor McPherson, and then Councillor Pachariva. So Councillor Timmers, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Regima. Through you to Ms. McKay. Great report. Very happy that the dog park is where it is. I think it's a great location. Just curious, I was looking at the size. I know we are beyond what's recommended for size. Is there a possibility that we could incorporate a small dog area, or no? Are we kind of maxed out? It seems like there's still a lot of open space there. So I know there's been some interest in a small dog area. Just looking for comments on that.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the Councillor Timmers. We did actually ask that question in the most recent survey. And yes, there are a number of respondents who indicated that they would like to see a smaller dog and a larger dog area. There was concern that like I think it was about 62% suggested that they'd be concerned about dividing the existing space because then you'd be removing that really lovely open area for the larger dogs that use that space to run. So, we will continue to reach out to these park users. We will continue, I would say, to survey and gauge how they feel about the space as we go on in our park exercises, and as we do with all of our parks, evaluating, do we have the appropriate amenities? Are there things we can add? Are there things we can come back to council for during capital budgets and ask for? So there may be an opportunity for sure to look at another potential dog area that would only accommodate, say, smaller dogs if we wanted to do that, and perhaps in another area of town as well.
Yeah, no, good point. I was kind of surprised at some of the other towns that have 3 dog parks. I was a little surprised by that. Yeah, I had no idea, but I think it's great. I see a lot of dogs coming up the mountain as they always have their heads sticking out of the window and they look so happy. So I know they're going to Kinsman Park. So I'm just so happy that that space is being utilized, and it's bringing people there and they can do other things while they're there as well. So anyway, great report. Thank you, Shannon.
You're welcome.
I like that visual.
It's true.
Maybe we should use that in communication. A little dog with his head out the window. Okay, Councillor Pachariva, sorry, Councillor McPherson is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and very pleased to see that we are going to have a permanent dog park in our town, and it absolutely is in the right place. Certainly with the population that Beamsville has, that I'm sure it's going to get a lot of use. In the survey, through you, Madam Chair, to Director McKay, did we ask a question about other locations in town? And maybe also a two-part question is, did we have respondents outside of Beamsville to the dog park proposal?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor McPherson. So for your second question first, yes, we had respondents outside of Lincoln respond. And to your first question, we did not specifically ask about dog parks in another location because we were trying to confirm whether or not we were moving forward with the permanent location being the pilot project, as we had presented to council. But as I alluded to, it did come out in that question about having a large dog park area and a small dog park area. So we didn't ask if, we asked in comments. We asked survey respondents to give us their ideas and comments. So we did get some comments that they'd like to see a space in Hillary Bald as an example, or they'd like to see a space in another existing park. But we didn't ask specifically about another park in another area in addition to the pilot location.
So thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So you didn't really receive anything from folks from Vineland or Camden or Jordan about, hey, this is great, but think about us the next time, or we'd like to see something down this way. Nothing came through the survey from those folks?
Nothing came through you, Madam Chair, to the council. Nothing came through the survey from those folks, but we did get respondents. I could go back and look because we did ask for the specific community in Lincoln. So we did get respondents from other areas, but to correlate that with a location in one of those other areas, I don't think we have that information, but I can check the survey results.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just following up on Councillor McPherson's question there. So 72% of the respondents said they reside in Beamsville. So simple arithmetic would say 28% live in the other parts of town of Lincoln. And 86% are using their vehicle to get there. So it doesn't seem to be a impediment. And people are digging the dog park, and I really appreciate, Shannon, you going back out. We had that initial survey that came out that the numbers were terribly low, and you know, you went back out and got almost 700 respondents. So good on you. If I had gold stars and we were close, I could put some on your forehead. So good show.
Please.
Just a question though, and again, we had chatted about this last year at budget. So the fact of going out and getting sponsorship on the fencing or things like that. Now, you had noticed or said about looking at local organizations to assist in the stewardship and the fundraising for the additional amenities. But wondering if we've been able to cross that bridge and knowing in some, conversations at the very, Paul Max, that they would be interested in doing things. And I'm sure Maggie's would be interested in doing things. So just wondering how far down that road are we on that, on sponsorship to cover the cost or maybe that of a small dog park somewhere else?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have a few interested businesses, nothing thus far as large as the fencing. We have reached out to a local fencing company. They unfortunately don't supply the permanent fencing that we need, but we are continuing to do that. And now, given that the permanent site fence won't go in until the spring, we do have more time to continue doing that. And we still have, from our initial sponsors, also some great supplies in I don't have a dog, so forgive me if I'm strong, but the bags that you use to clean up.
Poop bags, Shannon.
Yeah.
That's what they're called.
Or dog waste bags.
Dog waste bags.
I like poop bags.
I think I'm blushing. Yeah. So we do have a partner and a supplier who's donated that, and we still have supplies left, actually. So we're quite happy about that.
Fabulous.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pachariva. Councillor Timmers, I see your hand up. Do you have another?
Yes, it is. Sorry, I just had just another comment. I'm just looking at page 10 of 17, and it does show what area of Lincoln do you live in. And I find it really interesting that, 85 people that responded do not live in Lincoln, whereas 58 are in Vineland, 31 are in Jordan, and I believe it says 16 in Camden, and then over 400 in Beamsville. So I find that really quite interesting, actually, that we have people that don't live in the area commenting on the survey. So great survey result. And I'll have one other comment. We do have a lot of new people moving into our area, and I'm wondering how we communicate to them where the dog park is. Because I did see a post, someone looking, where can I walk my dog? Where can I go? They're new to the area. Perhaps they don't even know where Kinsman Park is. So I'm just wondering how we can get that information out to new residents that are moving here.
Through you, Madam Chair, well, I think actually the public survey that we just did was a great way to get that out, because it was in the paper, it was on the website. We actually went out through the Humane Society as well to licensed dog owners. So I think we probably hit a lot in doing that, because by asking them for information on what they thought about it, they were able to find out. But we do promote it on the website, and we do have some great infographics that our creative digital artist, graphic artist has created for us. So every once in a while, we can put those back through our social media platforms and channels and continue to promote it.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a good point. The survey itself probably accomplished that quite well, but yeah, thank you very much, Shannon.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Timmers. I see Councillor Pachariva's hand up for a second round. Go ahead, Councillor Pachariva.
Yeah, was just going to follow up on Councillor Timmer's question there. We had our Ward 2 meeting with Miss Busnello today. And when I went to my mailbox, I got my Town of Lincoln budget inquiry mail out. So why not a mail out, especially to those new residential neighborhoods and maybe all across the whole town? Because you know, we talked about an integrated communication strategy. You know, not everyone's on social media, not everyone reads the paper, but you know, a mail out or a combination seems to do the trick. So it's always nice to get mail rather than bills. So.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, absolutely. That's a great idea. And I think we're all excited to have Liliana here so we can sit down and start talking to her about some great plans for communicating all of the great things we're doing.
For sure. Okay, thanks everybody. I don't see anybody else's hand up. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Mikulik to receive for information project update report CS 0920 regarding the implementation of a permanent off-leash dog park. I will now ask our clerk to call the vote.
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Mikulik,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Chair Rajima,
Yes.
and Councillor Brunet and Madam Mayor are marked absent, and that carries.
Thank you. Now on to item 8.4, report FS 0220, a fire department rehab decon truck RFP award. Do members of council have any questions? I know Chief Hudson is here if you do. Don't see any hands up. There's a lot of information in the Councillor Mikulik, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just through you to the chief, with regards to this truck, can you explain to me again how the difference from the 100, like the difference, the increase, you know, from last year, how we were able to, I think originally when this truck first came up, it would be 2 budgets ago, it was about this price, and then last year it came in a lot less, and just what exactly has happened since?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor's question, just 2 years ago, we had this truck come to capital budget deliberations. It was not passed at that time. And then last year, for this year's budget year, it came back. The actual budget allocation was lowered from what we had requested, with direction to myself to, you know, try to get something, you know, as least expensively as we possibly can. So it did go out to tender, and what we did do is, you know, get the bids in, and the lowest bid was the one we're going for, is 395,000 and change. I realize that it is over our allocated budget for this year. So what the proposal that I've identified in the report is to essentially establish a user fee for this truck whenever it's deployed to a fire call. And as I stated in the report, there are provisions in most fire insurance policies to recover fire department costs, such as if we have to get specialized equipment in for an excavator or that kind of a thing, we're able to recoup those costs through the insurance companies. So by establishing a user fee for this truck, we're able to capture that additional monies to fund this truck. And over the life of the truck, we expect it to last 20 to 25 years. By doing so, we actually recover the entire cost of the truck, which really lessens the impact on the general tax levy.
Okay. Thank you very much for that response. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mikulik. I see Councillor Reimer's hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Njima. Through you to the chief, along the same lines as Councillor Mikulik, Chief Hudson, just wondered if there's any other options that we explored inside that budget number. Used trucks, dropping some kind of specs off of the one you had. Like, was there other areas explored to fit in that 295-ish budget range?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, yes, we did look at other options, but we're looking at the actual intended function of this truck. It is replacing a truck that currently serves as only the rehab unit. So that's the only one function. And as I mentioned in the report, there are actually three components to this. We have the rehab, which we are required by occupational health and safety regulations to provide for protection from heat and cold stress for our firefighters. So that rehab component is in the old truck, and it will continue to serve that function in this truck. This truck is a bit of an expanded function of a truck in that we are adding a decontamination feature for the health and safety of our firefighters. And as you may recall, several years ago, certain cancers contracted by firefighters were designated as presumptively contracted through their course of their employment as a firefighter, so they're covered by WSIB. So the other piece of that is the WSIB and the Ministry of Labor are taking steps to ensure that the incidence of cancer for firefighters are reduced or prevented, and decontamination is one component of that. So there are some fairly recent regulations that actually require us to do on-scene decontamination of our firefighters to remove all the toxins and things that they get on their bunker gear immediately on the scene, so that they're not breathing the off gases and they're not being exposed through their skin. So that's the new part of this. And of course, the third part is something that's we're starting to see a lot more in Canada. It actually has restroom facilities on it to allow firefighters, some personal relief for those calls that go several hours. And we're trying to accommodate both our male and our female firefighters alike. And this is a good step in the 21st century to do that. So in a long-winded way of answering your question, yes, we did look at other options. We could keep the original function as we already have, but that, of course, would not address the decon function. I looked to the city of Hamilton, for example. They actually have two separate pieces of apparatus, one to do the decon, one to do the rehab. So we're trying to be efficient here, keep our fleet size fairly small and compact. So we're trying to combine all those functions into one truck for efficiency. And therefore, we pared down as much as we could. But at the end of the day, when we put the condensed specs out for bid, this is what came back.
So thanks, Chief. So just to follow up, if I may, Chair Njima.
Yes.
So the original number then that we passed, what was that based on? Was it a different company, or was it different spec? I guess I'm just the uses of it, Chief, and all that is something that's beyond me. I'm just trying to wrap my head around. We approved something, and now we're loading quite a bit of money on it, and in the middle of the season, and like, it's just for equipment purchase to be out that much in a few months. It's kind of, yeah. a little bit out there. So I guess that's what I'm just trying to wrap my head around.
Yes, so through you to the question, I think really our original ask was around this amount of money. And I think it was direction of council. You know, there are recognizably a lot of budget pressures on the capital budget. I think the direction was, let's try to shave some things off. I don't think there was anything really specific that was cut off, other than the fact that we were trying to reduce the overall capital budget this last year. And like I said, we attempted to, but if we want to keep the original intent, what this truck is going to be used for the next 20 to 25 years, this really is a cost-effective way of doing it. And, you know, I compare this truck, which is very heavily custom made, and that's the problem with fire apparatuses. Each truck really is a custom made piece of apparatus. And so, you know, probably between a third to a half of it is the actual chassis itself, you know, the engine and the cab, and the rest of it is custom made body. And unfortunately or fortunately, every fire truck ever made is a custom job, and that's what drives the price up. And this actually, the price of this, given that it is a custom truck, is actually fairly reasonable when you compare that to snowplows. I know earlier this year, council passed, you know, report authorizing the purchase for 3 snowplows for about just shy of $1 million. So that's, you know, $350-ish per truck. A snowplow typically lasts 10 to 12-ish years. I look at the director of public works there to for that. And again, this truck's going to be lasting twice that. You know, we're looking at the 20 to 25 year range. And I must add too that this particular truck is actually staffed by total volunteers, the retired members. You know, they don't receive a nickel for doing that, and they're just doing it to contribute to our community for the health and safety of our firefighters. And when you look at the overall operating costs of the fire department, you know, we are the 3rd lowest in the region. And part of that is because we rely on our volunteer firefighters. And, you know, if we start getting into a full-time contingent, then it's much, much more expensive. So if we can take steps to invest in, you know, our firefighters, I think it's a wise investment to, you know, preserve that volunteer system for as long as we possibly can. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair Jima.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Reimer. And I have Councillor McPherson next. Oh, sorry. Did you have your hand up? I guess not.
Yeah, no, I did.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I put my hand down, but didn't take myself off mute. So thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Chief Hudson. Thank you for that bit of information with regards to the volunteers using it, because one of my questions was, how does this work? You know, obviously we only have 1 and we have 4 stations. So is it running out with a couple of firefighters from the station that it's at to the other side of town and having those firefighters there on site? But with it being volunteer, that is very good news. My question, I guess, would be, what triggers this unit to go out? You know, obviously it's built for a long fire by the sounds of it, a fire that is taking up many hours. It's not going out to a traffic accident or, you know, a medical emergency. So what would trigger it? And in that question, how often would it go out?
Okay, thanks for your question. Through you, Madam Clerk, or Madam Chair, to the councillor. So what this truck would respond to, obviously, major structure fires, as you alluded to, as does the current truck. And the expanded role with the decon feature is going to actually expand the number of times it goes out. So anytime firefighters are exposed to, you know, a significant amount of smoke or toxins from a fire, they would need to decontaminate. And as well, this truck would also respond to any water rescue call that we have, because you know, we do have capabilities of actually entering the water with our specialized suits, or ice rescues as well. And it's important, part of the decon, or I'm sorry, part of the rehab function is to provide a heated space, and we have special warming blankets and all kinds of specialized equipment. So really any fire, especially any elongated structure fire or any extended call really, that would go out to, and any water or ice rescue calls. So we're estimating, looking back on our statistics over the past few years, probably 20 to 25 times per year, about twice a month, really.
Okay, and from a location as to where it's going to stay, did that come into the did where the fires currently are happening come into the decision as to what station it would reside at?
Through you, Madam Chair. No, you know what? This truck would be stationed in Jordan, where the existing truck is right now. And as I mentioned, it would be staffed by the auxiliary units who are unpaid. So they would actually respond to the Jordan Fire Station, pick up the truck, and then head out to wherever it was in town. Because this is not necessarily a first line truck, it's not important for it to be there first. We do have the luxury of a little bit of time to get there. Mm-hmm. So, it's quite acceptable to have it in Jordan. There is room in Jordan. We have lots of space there. There is some storage area in Jordan to store some of their equipment and supplies and so on. So it's very handy there, and it works quite well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Councillor Pachariva, or McPherson. Councillor Pachariva is next, and then Councillor Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And just kind of doubling back and Deputy Mayor Mikulic's earlier comment about, from the aggregate industry and not getting enough money. So and maybe Chief, maybe maybe an angle is what we're charging for the calls. So, 833 in 2013 for the fire buffs, and 881 now is only an increase of $47, which doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot. And maybe that's something that we've, can be part of the fees and services going forward, that, if gasoline spikes or insurance or something, that we should look at that annually. No, it wouldn't generate a whole lot of money, but help to close the gap. Go an even thousand, you know what I mean? Just something. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair, to the question. Yes, that's something that we do look at each and every year. Okay. We have to balance, the actual costs. We don't want to be overly exorbitant. I don't think municipalities are really set up, or they're not supposed to be a profit generating center. So we have to really temper our ask as far as that goes. But we certainly do and will look each year at if the costs are appropriate and adjust accordingly.
Okay, Councillor Russell, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, possibly to the chief, possibly to our CAO. So I'm just looking at the reserve funds that you have as an ask for this coming budget for 2021. So you've got about $870,000 tapped into the reserves on an ask for 2021. What's the general health of that reserve fund right now, if you know?
I'm sorry. Are you asking me or the CEO?
Either to you or the CEO. Again, normally Ms. Trawala could probably help with this, but again, I know she's not available. Our sympathies to her. So this may not be able to get answered tonight, but I'm just wondering if you have any indication of what that reserve fund is, balance-wise.
Maybe I could start, and if the CEO wants to chime in as well. So I did consult with the Director of Finance about this. There are funds available for this purchase, the entire purchase. Albeit a little over what the original ask was. But as I said in the report, we're essentially looking to have the purchase fronted with the existing reserves and then replenish them year over year as we get the the fees in each year. Yep.
Mr. CEO, do you have any insight into the health of that reserve fund?
Through you, Mr. Chair. While I don't know what it is off the top of my head, I wouldn't say it's we've been using it readily and fairly regularly to replenish and to address a lot of our fleet, both fleet from a public works perspective as well as our fleet as it relates to fire. And so I think as development comes in, as those development charges are accrued, we'll be replenishing those accounts. But I would say it is slowly starting to find its way to that point as we experience growth and as we purchase things to a point where, again, we have a strategy and we'll be putting a strategy in place to make sure that it does replenish. So we're at that kind of tail end of a lot of the purchasing that we've been doing, definitely from a fire perspective. But we can respond to that, Councillor, and I can get you the exact amount.
Okay. Well, again, my follow-up to that would be through you, Madam Chair. Sorry, would be is that reserve fund exclusively funded? Excuse the double word through development charges, or is there also a tax base that goes into that?
Through Mr. Chair, it would be a combination of both.
Okay. One last follow-up, Madam Chair. Is that a fixed amount that goes in on a regular basis from our tax revenue, or does it go up and down per usage or per need?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, it is not fixed. I mean, there's a typical amount that we accrue because it's necessary to replenish that. But it is something that fluctuates from year to year as we look at both purchases as well as where we stand from a financial perspective. So Ms. Troll isn't here. I can definitely, again, share with council where that particular reserve is for fire vehicles.
Okay. And again, maybe that's just not a question, just a comment, something we can discuss at our next budget meeting, not to this particular project or request, but just overall general health. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I don't see anybody else's hand up. So I'm going to move on to the motion. I will now ask let me back up here. I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers to receive the information report FS 0220 regarding the award of contract for the supply and delivery of a new rehab decon truck for fire service. Approve the award of a contract to Intercontinental Truck Body Limited in the amount of $395,640, excluding HST, to supply one new 2021 Kenworth rehab decon truck. Authorize the Chief Administrative Officer and Clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. Amend the fees and charges bylaw to establish a fee for use of the rehab decon truck to cover the costs to respond to fire and emergency scenes. I will now ask our clerk to call the vote.
Thanks, Chair Regima. I'll begin with Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Miklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer.
No,
Is that opposed?
that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Chair Regima,
Yes.
and Councillor Brunet and Mayor Easton are marked absent, and that carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next on the agenda is number 9, confidential items. We have no confidential items this evening. And number 10 is committee remarks. Are there any committee remarks? Go ahead, Councillor McPherson.
Just a question of you, Madam Chair, and Councillor Russell for your ward meeting. Are other councillors able to watch?
Happy to have you join in. But thank you for that reminder because we've decided to postpone it for a week.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
because it's been a little bit, we had went through some back and forth trying to figure out whether we should first have it in person, and then last week it became clear we shouldn't have it in person. And then we went through discussions on how to implement a live meeting or a electronic meeting. And in the process, have communicated it out through our various social media channels, and have now coordinated with Liliana, our new communications director. And it's just sort of been a little bit of jumping around trying to figure out how to do it properly. And so we've gotten a lot of support, but we've decided that it's probably a good idea to wait another week and just to make sure that everybody's out there understands how the meeting is going to operate and make sure we can really push the information out to the best of our ability.
It's hard being a pioneer sometimes, yes. So, no, I'm interested in observing, not necessarily participating, but observing and seeing how that rolls in a virtual format.
Yeah, well, you would just, you were going to be sending out links. You register through Eventbrite, and simply just to put your email address in there, and then the link, information will come out to you with a link, a Zoom link, and you can jump in. You don't have to participate. You can just be there as if you were in the room, and that's the case for anybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not sure what order. There's two other hands up. Julie, how did they come up?
So we'll go with council first, and then we'll go to staff. So I'll go to Council Russell.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Deanne, I bumped you there. I'm just going to want to reiterate what Councillor Gemma just mentioned. Again, the more the merrier. We're happy to have any council and any additional staff participate. We do have lively conversations. It will be probably have a different feel this time being virtual. Of course, Councillor Reimer being a Ward 1 resident, we are more than happy to take the tough questions from him as usual. So please join if you can, even if it's just for a few minutes. By all means, we love to have you. And we need to get our attendance numbers up anyway. So go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Mr. Deanne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to, if committee will indulge me for a second, just wanted to clarify a comment that I made earlier in regards to universal basic income. So I did double check the minutes from the regional health and safety or health committee that passed the universal basic income report. There was a friendly amendment to the third clause that did indicate the study of a basic income guarantee project in Niagara region. So I do just want to clarify a comment I made earlier. Apologize, forgot to check it against the minutes. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for that. I see Councillor McPherson's hand up.
Yes, just very quickly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the BIA AGM tomorrow at noon. So all council is invited, and obviously it will be virtual. So over your lunch hour, join us.
Do we have to register for that through Eventbrite or anything, Councillor?
You do. You should have got an email, and I know a bingo card was put into each one of our mailbox, but you do need to register. So
okay. All right.
Do that, and yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I don't see any other hands up. So next on the agenda is adjournment. So good meeting tonight. Thank you, everybody. And this meeting is adjourned at 8:01 p.m.
Good night, all.
Right.
Yeah.
Good night.